Retreat is an essential part of warfare, though there are plenty of fools who will try to tell you otherwise. Knowing when to cut your losses and fight another day is one of the most important parts of being a leader, both in reality and in the Star Wars universe. The military forces which fought in the Clone Wars were no strangers to retreat, but pulling out of a battle had harsher consequences for the Republic than it did for the Confederacy. There were a variety of reasons for this, and in this video we'll be discussing several of them.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
There are a number of fundamental differences between how warfare works in the Star Wars universe and how it works in reality, of course, and retreat is one of them. Battles in the Star Wars universe were usually full-scale planetary invasions, more comparable to the invasion of a country than a battle within that invasion. The nature of retreat was changed by this. Most of you likely know a little something about the evacuation of Dunkirk. Now, that sort of hasty mass evacuation was how any retreat from battle usually went in the Star Wars universe, and as a result, it usually incurred quite a few casualties to the detriment of the retreating forces. To discuss how these retreats affected the Republic and CIS differently, we first need to discuss a staple of warfare in the Star Wars universe, the stateless strategy. This strategy was based on a very simple principle. No faction, no matter how powerful, can control space. Because of the nature of galactic civilization, it was completely impossible to lock down wide swaths of space, something which allowed underdog factions to gain an advantage against their opponents. Consider it this way, large states like the Republic had to maintain control of and protect a massive swath of the galaxy. This included many uninhabitable or sparsely inhabited worlds, as well as poorly charted regions and outright dead space. So even with high conscription rates, it simply wasn't possible to fully defend every world at once, never mind maintain a complete defense while conquering an existential threat. An existential threat, with a much smaller swath of territory or even no territory at all, could therefore pick its battles and just attack wherever their opponent wasn't, hiding its fleets in the void until it was ready to strike. The larger faction would be stuck with a dilemma. They could play defensively, fortifying key worlds while allowing their enemies to grow stronger out in the unknown, or they could play aggressively, attempting to comb space and wipe them out while leaving their territory vulnerable. To a degree, the Confederacy relied on the stateless strategy, as while they did have territory to defend, they had far less than the Republic, and they were more concerned with attacking than defending anyway. The Confederacy's campaign against the Republic was one of surgical strikes and hit-and-fade disruptive operations more than it was one of conquest. To them, losing a planet meant something much different than it did to the Republic. For the Republic, losing a planet was an outright failure. The Republic's goal in the Clone Wars, after all, was to reunite the galaxy under Coruscant's rule. Retreating from a planet was always a failure in this regard, no matter the circumstances. If they were pulling back from a failed invasion of a Separatist world, it showed the ineffectiveness of the Republic in retaking a planet. If they were pulling back from a world the Confederacy was conquering, it showed that the Republic couldn't even defend its own territory. On the other hand, losing a planet was far less of a blow to the CIS. The failed conquest of a Republic world was not as crippling a prospect for such an underdog faction, especially when you consider that conquest wasn't always the goal, and that they frequently attacked Republic worlds for the sake of weakening Republic military and nothing more. If the Republic captured a Separatist world, it still wasn't that much of a blow. All it did was incite local Separatists to fight harder. Furthermore, the CIS military was constantly on the move, frequently abandoning worlds and claiming new ones to set up on instead. While they weren't really a guerrilla force, they often operated like one, especially under General Grievous. In a sense, the Confederacy acted both like a conquering empire and an insurgent force, taking worlds when it suited them and striking from the void when it didn't. Of course, there were other reasons why retreat was much worse for the Republic. The obvious one is casualties. As we said earlier, retreat usually came with mass casualties, and while those casualty rates were usually preferable to the casualties an army would receive if they didn't retreat, they were still casualties. Simply put, the Confederacy was much more capable of losing large numbers of fighters when pulling out from a planet than the Republic was. This is rather obvious as far as ground forces are concerned. The Republic's clone troopers were all costly investments and their numbers were replenished slowly. They next to never had a numbers advantage at any point in the Clone Wars, and heavy losses always threatened to make the uphill nature of clashes with the droid army even worse. Even Republic victories often came with up to 40% casualties, which added up disastrously for the clone army. Defeats were much worse. Furthermore, that's assuming the Republic was even capable of getting everything off-planet during a retreat. Most of the time, this wasn't the case. The Republic military only had so many transports at its disposal, and the ones they had were often shot down during evacuation attempts. As a result, retreat often meant leaving stuff behind. Usually, this just meant equipment and vehicles, an acceptable if costly loss. However, it sometimes meant abandoning men as well. Such was the case in the Battle of Jabim, in which retreating Republic forces were forced to leave thousands of Jabimi loyalist soldiers to die. Things were different for the Confederacy's ground forces. The CIS had obscene numbers of battle droids to throw at their enemies, giving them a massive numbers advantage over them, as evinced by their almost lazy numbers-centric ground tactics. They didn't care about casualties for droid units as long as they accomplished their objective, and if that objective was a successful retreat, then commanders didn't care as long as the important hardware made it off-world. Oftentimes, Separatist commanders didn't even bother with proper retreats. When the Confederacy retreated from a planet, what they really meant was their leaders and any important equipment were taken off-world. Knowing the Confederacy's production lines would erase the losses by the time the week was over, they would often literally just abandon their droid armies on a planet. When commanders did this, it was often to spit in the Republic's victory cup. They rarely ordered the armies they were leaving behind to shut down, and so the Republic was forced to waste time and men running around mopping up stray droid armies which weren't programmed to surrender when a battle was lost. For naval forces, the dynamic was similar. When it came to warships, the Republic was outnumbered by the Confederacy 4-1, and numbers were even worse for things like personnel and starfighters. While naval retreats weren't as costly as planetary retreats, they still came with their losses, and the propaganda impact was even worse. The Republic Navy was the Republic's pride and joy, the legendary symbol of its might. This symbol was tarnished whenever the Confederacy forced the Navy to retreat from a battle. Furthermore, most of the CIS Navy's retreats were actually planned. Much of the CIS Navy functioned as a privateer force which operated by disrupting supply lines and ambushing small Republic fleets. Retreat was often part of this strategy, and it made the CIS Navy infuriating for the Republic to fight during the earlier half of the war. Lastly, the Republic had far more important worlds to defend. The CIS, as a confederacy, was fairly decentralized. Most of its important worlds were either industrial powerhouses like Medalorn, Celeste, and Mechas 3, or just set at key points on hyperspace routes like Yagdul, Abafar, and Clactor 7. It did have a number of strongholds such as Megiddo, Seleucami, and Felucia, the Outer Rim Siege's triad of evil. However, none of these strongholds were as crucial as any of the worlds the Republic had to defend. Even the Confederacy's capital, Raxus Secundus, was fairly unimportant. The Confederacy's strength was spread across the Rim, originating primarily from dead worlds and even remote deep space factory satellites. The same just wasn't true for the Republic. The Republic had to defend a ton of crucial worlds, ranging from population hubs like Denon, Alsaken, and Ord Mantell, to historical giants like Homberine, Anaxis, and of course, Coruscant itself. Retreats from any of these worlds would send shockwaves through the galaxy. In a sense, the power dynamic of the Clone Wars was almost unfair. The Republic had to defend territory like it was the faction with a massive advantage, when militarily, the opposite was true. And because of this, retreat, no matter where, was devastating. So, that's why retreat was so much worse for the Republic than it was for the Confederacy. But what do you think? Would you like to see a video on how the hell the Republic managed to overcome these disadvantages? Let us know in the comments section below. And just before you go guys, make sure you check out all those needy links in the description below needing your clicks. So if you're a gamer, we do have our Geetsly's gaming network where you can join us on Gary's Mod and Roblox. If you just want to chat Star Wars with other like-minded fans, you can join our main Discord server. And if you want to help support the channel more than you already are by watching this video, please do check out the Patreon. If you do decide to donate, you get access to a special behind the scenes Discord where you can see how our whole team works. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you in the next video.